Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Ace on Music. I'm joined as always with my faithful producer Mark and my assistant Sean.
Hello everybody.
So, before we kick things off, I know, we had a few audio problems last time. It's dealt with. Don't worry about it. So, this week, I want to talk about my favorite holiday of the year. Halloween. I know that, Sean, you're in the same boat as me.
Oh.
Halloween's bigger than Christmas,
Right.
Thanksgiving, whatever. And being big fans of music, I thought it'd be fun if we talked about what our favorite Halloween or Halloween-themed music would be. So I put a little thought into this, and I thought about some of the bands, but one of the first stories that leapt to mind was when I read Henry Rollins' Get in the Van book about his days touring with Black Flag. And that he was over in England this one time, and they were rehearsing, or they were setting up in a room, and he could hear this band on the floor above. And they were rehearsing, and song after song was a Misfits cover. And he thought, I got to go see who this band is that's so hell-bent on doing Misfits covers all night, and it was the Misfits.
So he was already a Misfits fan before they were actually young.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, he has the tattoos and everything.
All
but
right.
but something that he said then is that the Misfits were famous for doing Halloween shows. Is that, you're a little more into Misfits lore than I?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a tradition Danzig's carried over. Like, he's still to this day, he's tries to fill in the Halloween calendar with Danzig shows and bring forth all the atmosphere of what he was all about back
Sure.
in the Misfits. And
Well, even the Misfits themselves, their music is so in tune with Halloween themes. I mean, every
Exactly.
song is like a soundtrack to Halloween.
yeah,
So, I mean, I think that's awesome. But and probably one of the more successful bands that kind of delved into that kind of genre.
right.
Mark, are you at all familiar with the Misfits?
I am a bit, especially because you've taught me a bit about this.
Well, plus you're an East Coast guy originally, so. But there's a West Coast band that I also threw into this category, and it's a not so well known band, but it's one I really hope that you'll start checking out. They're San Diego based. They're called Deadbolt, and Deadbolt, I think they describe their music as psychobilly. I'm not exactly sure what genre to shove it into, but
I would say like horror psychobilly.
yeah,
Like,
I mean,
comedy.
the songs are bizarre. I mean, but really good. I mean, they have one album in particular that I'm very enamored with called Voodoo Trucker, but Tiki Man and several Tijuana Hit Squad and a bunch of the other ones are really good. But
Yeah, you turned me on to them, and I've been a fan ever since.
well, plus it's an experience to see them live. I haven't had the chance to take you to see them live yet.
No, I haven't seen them yet.
The first time I went to see Deadbolt live, I went with a friend of mine, from Canada. His name is Dennis, and Dennis and I we saw them. We were both big fans, and it confused me because from the first song, all of the fans who were right at the front of the stage were doing everything in their power to piss the band off. Screaming insults, trying to punch their feet, and I was like, this is out of control. What the hell? Why is security not stopping these people from doing this? Until I was kind of pulled aside by one of the hardcore fans and said, this is the tradition at
okay.
Deadbolt shows. This is what you do, So
Right.
anyway,
You know who else does that? A band called Phantomos, Mike Patton's project.
I've heard of them. I'm not
Yeah,
all that.
Dave Lombardo plays drum. As a matter of fact, the shirt I'm wearing now is Dead Cross. Dave Lombardo's on there. But there was a project with the guitarist for the Melvins, Buzz, and Dave Lombardo. And they have these long pauses with just stops and timing. Same thing. They're so long that people scream things in the middle of it and try to break their concentration. And that's their challenge, is to not break concentration so they can get these signatures together. And they literally stare at each other. Mike Patton's the conductor, by the way.
Okay.
And he sits there, and everyone's fuck, and they just sit there and it's funny. Same kind of concept, but
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Well, a band that I think needs to be talked about in this thing is probably the most Halloween band of them all, Kiss. Okay, I mean, how many Halloween people dress up at Halloween as Kiss? I mean,
Right.
I've been to so many Kiss shows where you see, quarter of the audience is in makeup and costume. You just don't see that for any other bands, and the whole concept of the demon and all that kind of stuff. So, and I know that you were actually at a very famous Kiss concert that happened on Halloween.
Yeah, that was the circus.
The Psycho Circus tour.
Yeah, it was at Dodger Stadium.
With the whole circus involved, right?
Right. They had you wear 3D glasses, and the videos on the monitors had 3D images, and it was really cool. And it was a big deal for me because I never got to see Kiss with the original band back in the 70s, and but it was really cool. It was at the Dodger Stadium, but you get bad seats at the Dodger Stadium, it sucks.
Well, I don't go to stadium shows regardless, but Mark, I know that you are a Kiss fan and have been since you were young. Have you had the honor of seeing them play live?
I have seen them, but it was a long, long time ago.
Ah.
And I was too young to appreciate what was going on around me, I think. It's like the difference between seeing a Dead show when you're naive and seeing a Dead show when you're aware. And that was my only opportunity.
Oh, wow.
I know it's not really related to this, but I have a cute little Kiss story that I thought I'd share with you because it involves their costumes. So a few years back, Thin Lizzy had toured with Kiss and Motley Crue over in Australia for several weeks, and we got to know the guys a little bit, especially Paul Stanley, who was a big Thin Lizzy fan, so he was hanging out with us. Anyway, a few weeks after that tour was done, the summer came along, and we were playing at Sweden Rock, and in a really great festival in Sweden. If you ever get the chance to go, I highly recommend it. But Kiss was headlining this one of the days, in fact, the day that we were there. And when you fly into Malmo Airport in Sweden, they then have buses that take you about the 2 or 3 hour drive to the festival site, which is out in the middle of nowhere. So we arrived at the airport, and Marco Mendoza, who was playing bass at the time, gets a call from Paul Stanley. And he says, "Are you guys still in Malmo?" And we said yes. And he says, "The suitcase with my stage boots was left behind at the airport. Can you guys go get it and bring it with you to the site?" And we said, "Yeah, of course." So we went and got the suitcase, and Marco actually opened up the thing, and we got to behold the wonderment.
The boots?
Yep.
And there was the boots that were on tour on that tour?
Yeah, there was his actual costume boots. So.
Okay. Awesome.
So it was pretty neat. But anyway.
Well, I think you can elaborate on that story. I remember you telling me that you
Anyway, we're going to be moving along.
All right. Sorry.
So another band that is also notorious for their stage persona and stage appearance is a band that came out of all places, Des Moines, Iowa, a number of years ago, and that's Slipknot. Mm-hmm. 9 guys in this band, all of them wearing crazy masks, and they changed the masks slightly for every single album. They've done a lot of really cool masks. And
yes,
I know when I first met them on the first album cycle, they were trying their best to do a Kiss thing, about keeping their true identities hidden.
Yeah.
But that went by the wayside before their album even, got out the gates, I think. So.
I don't know. I experienced them never seeing their faces, but I didn't really. It was pre-internet. Well, no, it was about the internet time. You can Google a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah. Have you ever seen them live?
Yeah, a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was just, growing up in the 80s and watching a lot of thrash metal bands like Pantera and Slayer and getting into that genre of music and just seeing those guys where, being a drummer, I'm just like, this is it. I can't play drums anymore. They're just so, to me, it was like a next level of drumming. It's like, how do you compete with that? Being a little older and being involved in the earlier thrash generation, and then seeing this young group of kids, for me at the time was kids just whip ass. It's like I can't. It took me a while to just like want to listen to it because it was like it was too much for me.
Well, it's
But
funny. It's funny as you name these bands, it's becoming clear to me that metal in general has a very heavy topping of Halloween all over
Oh
it.
yeah,
I
that's
mean,
why this is a hard subject because I got notes here of things I want to talk about just about Halloween. But
well,
yeah.
how about you, Mark? What when you think Halloween and you think music, what's some of the things that leap to mind?
I'm gonna throw you know me with something a little bit different than what you guys
course.
listen to, and I have to be honest. I think of people like Warren Zevon, and it's not just Werewolves of London, which was kind of a fun
That was a
thing,
great
but
song.
Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner.
Right.
I like. There's nobody like what he could put together on something like that, and I think sometimes I feel like it can be easy to just be Halloween.
Yeah.
But it could be hard to write a great masterpiece, song that is insightful, thoughtful, creative, and yet kind of like really creepy.
Right.
And even though staying out of the metal genre, which we had kind of been wallowing in there for a few moments, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention the great Danny Elfman at this point. I
Right.
mean, the guy sang and wrote the music to Nightmare Before Christmas, and is there more of a real Halloween song than This Is Halloween? I mean, such a great song.
Well, it's funny because Halloween was such a big tradition to me of going out to do things. Going to haunted mazes or anything involving Halloween was a big deal. And my first introduction was my cousin trying to get me to go to a Oingo Boingo show on Halloween night at Universal Amphitheater. And I'm like, man, I don't know. I they're good, but I'm not a big fan, and I don't want to ruin my Halloween. And I tell you what, when I went and seen them at Universal Amphitheater on Halloween, I made sure I went to every show I could go after that.
Yeah, I mean,
it was just.
I'm glad you brought that up. I
yeah.
mean, that's another tradition, right? Was Oingo Boingo on Halloween. In fact,
Yep.
even though Oingo Boingo is no longer a band,
Mm-hmm.
the remaining members have formed somewhat of a band.
Yeah, Johnny Vatos still carries the torch. Matter of fact, I think he's got something coming up this week there's so many members involved from Oingo Boingo that it's Johnny Vatos and members of Oingo Boingo. That's what he's calling the band right now.
Oh, wow.
So
But they, as far as I can remember, every time I've lived in L.A., I think they always played around Halloween.
Yeah, Johnny Vatos puts that.
Yeah.
He still keeps that tradition together.
I think that's awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome.
Were you all aware of Oingo Boingo growing up on the East Coast?
I knew of Oingo Boingo, but not in this context.
Cool enough.
So I will tell you, our tradition for Halloween when I was young,
Uh-huh.
and I don't even know if it still goes on. It might, was the Dr. Demento
Oh yeah.
Halloween special.
Hell yeah.
Mr. Gravedigger,
Oh,
and
yeah.
everything from
I
Monster
forgot
Mash.
about
Yeah,
that.
I mean,
Did you get that in Canada?
No, but
No.
I've certainly heard of it. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
it
Much
was
has been written about it.
it
Yeah.
was awesome.
Was that on like KMET or what? It was on every Sunday, right?
The Dr. Demento show was every Sunday, but
yeah,
I
but
remember
the Halloween thing, it was
Yeah.
on. It was on one of those radio stations.
it was on one of those. For me, I think it was. To be honest, I think it was one of the New York radio stations where Howard Stern was in the morning. I think it was Imus first, and then it was like Howard, and then so it was the craziest thing. And then at the end of the night, I think it was an AM radio station in New York, and I would kind of listen to it when my parents thought I was asleep.
Yeah.
And you would hear Dr. Demento raging, and it's cool. It's fun.
It's funny that you bring up, childhood traditions about Halloween music, because I mean, there's some songs that everybody knows that are so Halloween, like Monster Mash. I mean, everybody knows that one, and I always will associate that with Halloween, or
Right.
even to some extent, maybe the Giant Purple People Eater. And
Yeah.
things like that.
Absolutely.
But you had something cool here, right? You had.
Well, getting on the topic, to me, what started my journey of heavy metal and like Black Sabbath and everything, when I was a kid, we got the Halloween records. So when
Loved them.
people ask me what was my first album, I start thinking like, well, no, it was Kiss, no, it was Black Sabbath. But my first albums were horror soundtrack not soundtrack, but horror sound effects.
Right.
So I found this in my archive of collections in the garage, but this is an album I listened to when I was a kid.
Here,
with
check it
headphones.
out.
And it was from the 70s.
Check that out.
Sounds,
Boys even had it framed.
Yeah, sounds to make you shiver, and that started my passion of collecting horror theme soundtracks, and just this started the getting the Jaws soundtrack and stuff like that. And,
Well, I it's not really music, but I mean, I think it's worthy of talking about in this conjecture. I loved sound effects records too when I was a kid. That was a thing you did. You played them, put it on Halloween, and you play it through to the outside.
And being 7, 8 years old, it kind of was scary. I don't know if you listen through headphones, but I listened to that through headphones.
But I also remember things like the Alfred Hitchcock stories for scary stories for young people. Mm-hmm. Oh, I love those so much.
Yeah.
I listened to those over and over. In fact, I still have. I think I still have the cassette of the original that I had, and I listened to it. I listened to it on YouTube last Halloween because I'd forgotten those stories on there, and it was just like going home when I listened to that.
I think me and you talked about this, and I actually found some of the vinyl on.
You did?
Yeah,
I did.
Yeah.
It's such a lost art. It
is.
When we used to gather around, and I don't. That's not like somebody who's now 50, never mind 70 or 80, saying, "Oh, the radio was so." But the idea of listening to a story is just. It doesn't. I mean, who does that anymore?
Well, you got to think about like Wolfman Jack, man. You
Absolutely.
You remember Wolfman Jack?
Of course.
Now he played rock and roll, but he always had a story of how he introduced the music. So it was, awesome.
Yeah, but you're right, Mark. I mean, the spoken word stuff. I mean, you still obviously have the books on tape, where they record the actual books. But projects that are purely created for the audio are I don't really see those too often anymore.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a
lost
tradition.
But to take off on something you said a moment ago, you said that those albums led you into buying things like the Jaws soundtrack and everything.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about something that I've noticed as a resurgence in the last little while. There's a couple of companies who are really at the forefront of this. One's called Waxworks Records, and the other was called Mondo Recordings. And they are systematically taking a lot of the soundtracks to horror films and releasing them in wonderful editions on vinyl, and all kinds of colored vinyl, and doing things like that. And I know personally I've been buying them quite a bit over the last few years.
Yeah.
Soundtracks I never thought I'd see, period, let alone on a really cool vinyl edition.
Right.
Although they do get expensive. Like I know.
Oh, I know.
This is not a horror one, but they just put out the complete soundtrack to The Mandalorian Season 1. It's 8 albums long, one for every episode.
Are you serious?
And it's $200 for the package, though, So, but, yeah, if you are at all into famous soundtracks for horror films or whatever, check out Waxworks, check out Mondo.
Yes.
Well worth your time.
Yes.
But I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention a couple of the other big horror-themed bands. Let's talk about our friend from Florida, Marilyn Manson.
Oh, Marilyn Manson. Oh, for sure.
I mean, the whole concept, every member of the band has taken their name where the first name is taken from some famous beauty queen and the last name is taken from a serial killer. So you have Marilyn Monroe and Charles Manson forming his name. There was Twiggy Ramirez, and there was, all kinds of guys in this one.
Yeah, I forget what when I saw them first. I want to say it was 92, maybe. I don't know if it was Danzig or something, but it was before their first album. They were on their first tour, and most of their stuff was a lot of just sound effects, and it wasn't like the music. Yeah. It was a lot of just spooky sounds.
But once they put out their first album, Portrait of an American Family, they really made a statement. And
yes, they did.
And I think, since we're talking Halloween music, we have to also tip a hat to one of the masters, Alice Cooper. I mean, guy who writes songs about necrophilia in the 70s and gets away with it.
Wow, I was going to say we can't forget about that guy
but Manson, but the problem what you have with guys like Cooper and Manson and all these things is that when they come out, they're pushing the lines. They're pushing the extremes to shock you. They want to shock you. The problem with shock is it wears off. You know, so when Manson came out with his second record and boldly called it Antichrist Superstar and kicked up all this stuff, you know, and declaring that, or when the Church of Satan, the head of the Church of Satan at the time, declared that they were making him an honorary reverend and all this stuff.
I remember all that.
This was all, you know, and now when you look at Marilyn Manson and all of his stuff, you kind of go, yeah, and You know?
Right?
Have
Right?
you seen what the world's like now?
But yeah, Alice Cooper, man. I mean, some of the best stage shows I've seen as far as the Halloween
Oh,
themes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Guillotines and
Yeah.
all kinds of crazy stuff.
When
going
I
on.
first saw Alice Cooper, I made a tradition to try to go see him every tour.
Mark, you've got to be a Cooper fan, right?
I am a Cooper fan.
I've had the pleasure of touring with the man on a number of occasions, and he's one of the sweetest guys, and a very generous guy. I mean, I remember he loves going to the movies, and regularly on tour he would just I'm going to go to the movies this afternoon. Who wants to go? You know, and a group of people would go with and go watch movies. And he's a huge horror movie fan.
Yeah.
And we talked many times about horror films.
Well, he definitely walks the walk, doesn't he?
He does.
Yeah.
He does. and it's weird because you take somebody like Cooper, who now in his later life has found God and become born again, but still has this kind of rather notorious persona that he has to make come to life on stage every night.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, we all have the double twin personalities,
Yeah,
right?
but I think it's also a testament to the fact that his stuff isn't really that scary anymore. You know? I mean, it's
yeah, well, I mean, I guess.
you'd see worse on network television. You know,
Yeah, that's true.
So,
Yeah.
but so another one that I think's got to get mentioned, maybe the grandfathers of it all, Birmingham, Black Sabbath.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the opening chords when I was a kid and I heard that first Sabbath album, and I heard especially the one song that really drove home with me, coming from a Catholic upbringing and having all those kind of fears, was the song NIB. And when you're listening to the song's lyrics, and it is literally a love song of the devil singing to the person and coercing them into joining him in eternal life, it became one of the scariest songs that I'd ever imagined people putting down on vinyl when I was a kid.
No, I know the Children of the Grave, man. That was
Yeah.
that was spooky.
Or even the song Black Sabbath, you know, when
Yeah.
you hear the bells
Yeah.
tolling and all this stuff. I
But
mean,
it goes back to our childhood, nostalgia. You think about it, just like what we're talking about, that album, the sound effects.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the opening sound for the Black Sabbath album was the bell and the rain. You know, and
you know, and it does. The music doesn't even need to be particularly scary. It just needs to be used right. Like, have you seen that movie? What is it called? I think it's just called Hitchcock, and Anthony Hopkins plays Alfred Hitchcock.
Yeah.
While he's creating Psycho.
Right.
And they're going through the whole process, and it wasn't until that amazing soundtrack was added to that shower scene that it became the iconic thing that it is to this day.
Yes.
Or when you sit there and you think about, I mean, John Carpenter's films.
Well, exactly.
Carpenter, I mean, an anomaly. Here's a director who also writes his own soundtracks, but in my opinion has created some of the most effective, terrifying soundtracks. I mean, Halloween.
Right.
I mean, that is an iconic soundtrack now. Everybody knows that. Dun, 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 dun,
Right,
dun,
right.
You know.
But
Or-
it goes back to like Star Wars too. I mean, you think about it. What would Star Wars be like without
without John Williams' soundtrack, it
Yeah.
would be half the movie that it is.
right?
But
But
what are there any particular soundtracks for you? Like, and the last comment I'll make on that before I turn it over to you, Mark, is a piece of music which isn't scary at all has become the theme song for one of the scariest movies in history, which is, you know, the Tubular Bells piece from The Exorcist. I mean, that guy, you know, Mike Oldfield is not a guy who writes horror films or soundtracks to horror films, but that piece of music,
it would always
it made The Exorcist be 10 times scarier than it was.
correct.
But if it comes down to soundtracks to films, Mark, what would you say are some of the ones that you think were the most effective at conveying the scariness?
I actually had the opportunity to listen to some discussions on this a few years ago about the meaning of 5 notes.
Okay.
The Jaws and the Close Encounters and things like that. That you have a repeating pattern, and it just kind of just drives something.
Right.
And it's the tribute to music. It's that music is the visceral component that ties in our deepest fears.
Right.
And that's, I
think that's why John Carpenter is so famous.
Yeah,
he's got those those famous notes that are in the middle of
the soundtrack to the thing. But then you mentioned Star Wars a moment ago and John Williams. John Williams, in my opinion, wrote one of the scariest soundtracks in the history of motion pictures, and one of the most recognizable. If I go to anybody in the world right now and go da-dun, 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 everybody knows what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Everybody knows that's a shark, and that knows that that's Jaws.
Yeah.
So,
and it's the fear. It's not that it's Jaws as much as it is the underlying fear of the unknown, that there's something underneath the surface that we have no control over.
Exactly.
And it brings it all home,
Yeah.
Oh, man. And, we did kind of touch on them, but I wanted to talk a little bit about one more band, and that is the mighty Slayer. I mean, Slayer, could you get any more Halloween band like Slayer? I mean, is there a stage they ever had which wasn't covered in pentagrams and upside-down crosses or whatever?
Well, what that all stage is from, a lot of it's war written. It's about your darkest thoughts and fears of people, what people stray away from and they don't want to talk about, and it's definitely, it could be horror. Definitely horror related. Obviously, horror. But
well, I mean, there's a famous artist who's done a number of album covers and created some of the most nightmarish images known to man, and that's H.R. Geiger.
Yes.
But if you ever watch any of the documentaries about him, he says that he would paint those nightmarish images because that would be what he would dream about, and the only way he could exercise those feelings was to get them out on canvas.
Yes.
But that being said, when it comes to the music and the build-ups and all that, I never will forget an interview I saw with Alfred Hitchcock himself a number of years ago, where he said the way when he shoots a scene, and this is very very much because the music has to follow along with it. He said, if you have a scene like this with 2 guys sitting at a table talking, and for 5 or 10 minutes we sit here and chat, and at the end of that suddenly, boom, a bomb goes off. Well, then anybody who's watching that gets about 3 seconds of terror out of that. However, if you start by showing that there's a bomb underneath the table that could go off at any time, and then watch the conversation, it now becomes 5 to 10 minutes of complete tension because you're waiting for it. You know something's coming, and that's gonna, be a big deal. So
kind of like music, right? Like if a band throws in some double bass in a song very sporadically, it's awesome. Like that build up. But if a band's playing double bass through the whole thing, you're like, that's good. That's what they do. But but it's the same thing, right? Same concept. Like, throw little bits into songs that are not overpowering and ruin the song. Like,
was there any other bands that you wanted to talk about?
Well, we got to mention White Zombie.
White Zombie, and Rob Zombie himself, of
the
course.
Cramps. I got a list here.
Oh,
now.
the Cramps.
Yeah.
I saw a show once where it was Queens of the Stone Age, the Cramps, Tomahawk, and Masters of Reality, and it was at the Greek on Halloween. And I remember the Queens of the Stone Age guys dressed up like priests.
Okay, yeah, I remember that too.
Except Nick Oliveri, with his bald head, he put horns on it.
Yeah,
So.
I remember that. One of my best Halloween shows was White Zombie. It was I want to say 93, 94. It was 93, 94. It was White Zombie, The Cramps, and oh God, I forget the other bands, but Elvira was the host, so she was coming out introducing the bands and doing her jokes and.
Oh, that's a good point. I mean,
yeah, and
Rob Zombie is basically a champion of horror. I mean,
Yeah.
he went on from music to actually direct horror films.
Yeah.
Some of the best too. So.
right, yeah, but Cramps opened up for him, and I just remember the singer Lux. His
Lux
name's
Interior, yeah.
Yeah, he was just whipping everybody in the audience and whipping the van, and people were getting pissed off because they were getting whipped, and it was pretty cool.
Yeah, rest in peace, right?
Yeah,
So,
right. Rest in peace, Lux.
any other bands that spring to mind when you think Halloween, Mark?
AC/DC.
AC/DC.
Highway to Hell.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. You know, I know growing up, again, as a Catholic, I when I was very young, I couldn't even quite bring myself to say those words, you know, going down party time. But same way with the Sex Pistols. I mean, I am an anarchist.
All right.
I am an antichrist, you know.
I know we're trying to cram a lot here because we're going to be cutting it short soon, but we can't forget Michael Jackson's Thriller, man.
Oh, Thriller, of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean,
that was a big deal when I was a kid.
Because
man.
Halloween, you know,
John
and that's,
Landis video.
That's right. You know, you look at Halloween, and here we are talking. We're not talking about Halloween. We're talking about metal. We're talking about Edge. We're talking about, you know, but Halloween itself is a kid's
Sure
holiday.
It is. Sure it is.
And
I'm still a kid.
Michael Jackson, yeah, exactly. And Thriller, I mean,
Thriller.
that is an iconic Halloween
man.
moment. You know, they got the costumes, the zombies, and you have the element of fun.
And he had the wherewithal to get one of the greatest horror directors out there to
At the time,
do
John
the video.
Landis,
I mean,
right?
the guy came off of doing American Werewolf in London and things like that. I mean,
Yeah.
it was amazing. It was amazing.
I remember getting the making of Thriller
Yeah, I've seen
on
that.
VHS
Yeah.
and watched it forever when I was well, what year did that come out?
That was you know, I know that he spent a fortune making that thing,
Yeah.
worth every penny, because
Yeah.
that's going to live forever. You know,
Vincent
that one.
Price dialogue.
Oh. Yeah.
yeah.
And you know, I the last band I think I'll mention, because I had to hide it from my mother, was when Iron Maiden came out with Number of the Beast.
Oh, yeah.
But
Right.
anyway, I wanna thank both Sean and
Thank you.
Mark for joining me on today's episode. I want to thank all of you for your continued support. Please subscribe to the podcast and join us every week. We also we're also on the Patreon platform. You can support us over there at patreon.com/aceonmusic. We do an extra show called Ace on Music After Hours over there, so you can see what we talk about after this show ends. And I think that we'll probably talk a little more about Halloween soundtracks on this one. So if
Yeah,
you
we
like
just
this
kind of
conversation,
skimmed the surface
Yeah.
on this one. Oh.
but we also love to hear your feedback. You can email us at acetalksmusic@gmail.com or leave comments on the video in YouTube or wherever. And until next week.